Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving straight into one of the most mesmerizing and powerful chants in human history. We are talking about a piece of poetry that has somehow survived for centuries, sparking fierce devotion, intense scholarly debate, and a massive quest for historical truth across the Indian subcontinent. You might have heard it before. It's this hypnotic, rhythmic Sanskrit chant called the Shiva Tandava Stotram. If you've ever listened to it, you know it's got a rhythm that practically demands your attention. With its rapid-fire syllables and intense, driving energy, it literally mimics the sound of a beating drum. It's an absolute masterpiece of devotional literature that has echoed through ancient temples, classical dance performances, and even modern media. But here's the real mystery we're unpacking today. Who actually penned these incredible words? I mean, the traditional answer is famous, right? But as we start digging into the historical, archaeological, and scholarly sources, the truth turns into a fascinating puzzle of myth and reality. Section 1. The Ten-Headed King, Myth and Complexity. So, to find our answer, we first have to look at the legendary figure traditionally credited with writing it, Ravana. And depending on where you look, he's a figure of wild contrasts. In the ancient Hindu epic, the Ramayana, he is the ultimate bad guy, a fearsome 10-headed demon king who abducts Sita. But flip over to Sri Lanka, and in recent decades, he's viewed very differently. He's revered as a great Hela king. In this view, he's a foundational figure of an incredibly ancient civilization, completely distinct from outside influences, ruling over a highly advanced kingdom. And even in the epic, Ravana wasn't just some one-dimensional villain. The guy was a complex scholar. Those 10 heads, scholars actually interpret them as a metaphor for his total mastery over the 6 Shastras and the 4 Vedas. Literally an intellect said to be 10 times that of ordinary people. Our sources note he's credited with writing over a dozen complex texts, including medical and astrological treatises, and get this, even compiling the Samaveda with musical notations. So a brilliant piece of poetry like the Stotram, it actually fits perfectly onto this legendary resume. Section 2. Searching for Ancient Lanka, the Archaeological Quest. But with such a towering mythological presence, we have to ask ourselves, what does modern archaeology actually tell us? Can we find physical proof of this poetic king? Well, there is a pretty massive gap between the mythological timeline and the sobering physical evidence found on the ground in Sri Lanka. For example, we have places like the Ravana Ella cave, where legends say Sita was hidden. Excavations there do show human habitation, but we're talking 20,000 to 25,000 years ago. That is way, way before any historical Ravana could have existed. Then we have the stunning Sigiriya rock fortress, which sometimes gets linked to Ravana's palace. However, archaeology proves it was actually built by King Kasyapa in the 5th century CE, which is roughly 2,000 years after the estimated setting of the Ramayana. So the crucial takeaway here is that while we absolutely have proof of incredibly ancient civilizations in these locations, pure archaeology just hasn't found a direct link to the Ravana of the epic. In fact, back in 2012, a team from the Archaeological Department of Sri Lanka tried to map out Ravana's mythical sites, and they came to a very sobering conclusion. None of the sites could be definitively authenticated to him. There isn't a single verified artifact or inscription. The stones, it seems, are completely silent on our author. Section 3. The Mountain and the Song. Okay, since the stones are silent, let's turn to the mythology and see how the legend explains the birth of this famous song. It is a wild story of immense ego clashing with sheer devotion. The legend goes that Ravana was flying his chariot across the universe and found his path blocked by Mount Kailash, which is the abode of Lord Shiva. Blinded by his own massive ego, Ravana arrogantly decides, "I'll just lift the mountain out of my way." While observing this, Lord Shiva simply presses his big toe down on the mountain. That immense pressure completely crushes Ravana's hand, making him cry out in such agony that the sound echoes across all realms. Trapped and in excruciating pain, Ravana starts chanting for 14 days straight, just begging for forgiveness. And boom, this is exactly where the Shiva Tandava Stotram is supposedly born. Legend has it that this spontaneous burst of poetry, consisting of 1,008 verses, chanted during the highly auspicious Pradosha Kal twilight, was just flawless. The words capture the beauty and raw power of Shiva so perfectly that it mesmerized the entire universe. Lord Shiva was extremely pleased. He not only forgave Ravana and let him go, but he actually gifted him the indestructible divine sword known as the Chandrahas. Section 4. The Cosmic Dance, Decoding the Tandas. To really appreciate what makes this chant so incredibly powerful, you have to understand what it's actually describing. The chant's rhythmic Temet-Demet meter, that perfectly mirrors the Tandav, the cosmic dance of Lord Shiva. And this isn't just a physical movement, it embodies the 5 fundamental principles of the universe: creation, preservation, destruction, illusion, and emancipation. It is highly energetic, brisk, and vigorous. When you listen to the Stotram, you are literally hearing the poetic equivalent of 3 intense emotions, or rasas: heroism, terror, and anger. The words themselves are practically dancing. The tradition behind this dance is incredibly deep, too. Classical texts like the Abhinaya Darpan by Nandakishwar break this divine dance down into 7 distinct forms. We're talking everything from the deeply joyous Ananda Tandav to the wildly destructive Samhara Tandav. The Stotram captures this fierce, unbridled energy so flawlessly that, honestly, for centuries, nobody even questioned that only a being of Ravana's immense power could have written it. Section 5. Who really wrote it? The scholarly reveal. But if we step outside of the mythology for a second, modern scholarship suggests a completely different, yet equally fascinating origin story. When experts analyze the text itself, the plot thickens. According to research by scholar V.S. Agarwala, the Shivatandava Stotram does not appear anywhere in the early Puranas. Instead, the specific literary styles and iconographic motifs used in the poem point squarely to it being composed during the Rashtrakuta period down as the Deccan region, around the 8th century CE. So scholars think this masterpiece likely wasn't written by a demon king at all. It was probably penned by an anonymous, brilliant 8th century poet who engaged in what's called pseudoepigrapha. That's just the very common ancient practice of attributing a brand new text to a famous historical or mythic name to give it instant authority. To back this up, we just need to look at the Ramayana itself. Pioneer archaeologist H.D. Sankalia pointed out that our current written versions of the epic evolved much, much later than the events they depict. In fact, none of the surviving manuscripts even predate the 11th century CE. Statistical studies show the original epic actually ballooned from about 8,000 verses to nearly 18,000 verses over time, featuring tons of extensive additions. Because it was this fluid, evolving oral tradition, it made it incredibly easy for later brilliant works, like our Stotram, to just be retroactively woven right into the Ravana legend. And here is the real kicker. This was definitely not an isolated incident. As scholars have discussed, it was actually a huge literary trend to attach the name Ravana to various works. We've got fragments of a Vedic Bhashya on the Rig Veda attributed to a Ravana. There's a commentary on the Vaisheshika Supras known as the Katandi, plus ancient texts on Nadi Shastra and Tantra, all carrying his name. So the disputed authorship of our song is really part of a much larger historical pattern of using the legendary king's name to grant prestige to a text. Section 6. The Enduring Mystery. So where exactly does this leave us on our little detective journey between myth and reality? We have silent archaeology, a wildly dramatic mythological origin story, and some pretty compelling scholarly evidence. But you know what? Regardless of whether it was written by an ancient king lifting a mountain or an anonymous 8th century poet, the story surrounding the Stotram preserves this profound cultural memory. The legend of Ravana endures because it dives into universal human truths that pure archaeology just cannot capture. It perfectly explores the corruption of power, the danger of possessing immense knowledge without the wisdom to use it properly, and that incredibly fine, dangerous line between true devotion and blinding obsession. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. When a piece of art is this moving, this rhythmically perfect, and manages to survive for centuries inspiring millions, does it really matter who actually held the pen? And why do we as humans so often prefer a grand myth over historical reality? It's definitely something to think about the next time you hear those mesmerizing, drumbeat syllables.